I'm Carol Fitzgerald from readinggroupguides.com, a website from the Book Report Network, and the host of the Book Reporter Talks to Video podcast series. And we're just talking to Fiona. We had her in the office when we were in New York a couple of years ago, talking about the Chelsea Girls. And it's so much fun to have her back now. We know so many of you are looking forward to having a conversation with her tonight about this book. We're going to be talking about the Magnolia Palace. And the Bookachino Live Book Group event is really a little bit different from the other programs that we do. First of all, we're going to be talking about the book with spoilers. So if you haven't read the book, just know we're going to be talking about things that happen throughout. Just know that, it's something that you are going to want to be like puffing your ears if that's what happens, because we're assuming everybody's read the book. Our book reporter reviewer, Amy, had this to say about the Magnolia Palace. If you like a little family drama and a mystery tossed together with a smattering of art history, this is a lovely book to keep you company for a weekend. And I read it in a weekend, and I do agree, because I'm going to give you a little secret, and Fiona's probably not going to believe this. A couple of weeks ago, I realized this was the only book of Fiona's that I had not read. I've read everything through the years, and the one thing, Magnolia Palace, had slipped by me. So last weekend before this, I sat down and read the book in a weekend, and they were right. It was a complete delight. It was completely lovely to immerse myself in it. And I'm so glad we're doing this discussion to give me a chance to have read this book and be talking to her about it. So let's go about what the format this evening is going to be. I am going to start by noting that, you've already had the spoilers, and we're going to begin the discussion with Fiona, and then a couple of members of the audience are going to jump on and ask some questions live. And then I'm going to take audience questions from the Q&A. So the evening goes on, just make sure you're dropping your questions in the Q&A, not in the chat. And the chat is where we'd love to hear what you're reading and where you're from. Because what we really pride ourselves upon these events is we gather people from across the country. It's not just people from the left coast or the right coast. And many, many times when we look at the end, we've had people from as many as 40 and 42 states. So we love that about what we're able to do. So with that housekeeping behind us, let's welcome Fiona.
Hello.
Hello.
We did it. We're here. Hi, everybody. There are so many familiar names out there. Thank you, everybody, for joining in. This is great.
So happy that you're here. So excited to be able to doing this. So, I mean, really, we haven't seen each other in a while in person, have we?
No, it's been a while. I know.
But I feel like I see you all over. So it's like, I feel like I catch up with you of what's going on.
And likewise, I get your newsletter, so it feels like I'm in the loop.
You know what's going on. I love hearing where ideas come from on books. So let's start by you telling us what prompted you to write about the Frick Museum, because you're like, you walk around the city, I figure you're seeing a little thing there and a little thing here, and I'd like to do this. So tell us how you get started.
Yeah. The Frick has always been in the back of my mind. It's just one of my favorite museums in New York City. It's just such a gem of a museum, and it's not like the Guggenheim or the Met. Mm-hmm. It was a residence, and then it became a museum after Mr. Frick died and left it to the public. And, I just have always loved going in there. I love taking people from out of town there. And for me, it was really perfect because I like dual timelines. And with the Frick, I have a building that changed. Mm-hmm. And so that's what I'm looking for. And that's what made me think, okay, maybe this will work.
And had you spent a lot of time in that museum? Like you say, you enjoy it. Was this one where you'd hear there was a new exhibit there and you'd go? Is that something you would actually do, going to that museum to get to know it, better before you started writing the book?
No, what happened was I'd been to it a number of times before, but I got the idea to set the book at the Met in January of 2020.
Whoa.
So I got this amazing behind the scenes tour they took me on, where I went down in the basement where there's that bowling alley that's described in the book that's really there.
Wow.
And they took me through where the kitchen used to be and up to the top floor where the maids' rooms used to be. And, we saw the fur vault. It was so amazing. And then, of course, everything went on lockdown. And so at that point, luckily, the Met has this incredible floor plan on their website.
Okay.
And with that, you can go into any room and get a 360-degree view. And so I used that. I would be working and think, all right, what's the painting above the fireplace in the library? And I could jump in virtually, look around and find it. So
Wow.
thank goodness.
So by having that kind of experience, it's like you were there, but not there. But you also, your memory can be faulty sometimes. You often can have a faulty memory, and you didn't have to worry about that because you could just go in and check yourself on what had happened. And if they ever change the exhibit, it's like, no, not till my book comes out. Please don't move anything.
Yes, yes, exactly. And, you know, the house was different in the 1919s than it was later. They have moved things around. So they had some great black and white photos of the original residence. So you could see the bedrooms, which of course are now offices and storage. And so that helped too, to just make sure I got things right.
Yeah, let me just go in with my little tape measure things off. But how lucky you went that early in the year. What if you said, I'm going to write a bit and then go, and you wouldn't have been able to have the access that you needed, because you still have to be there, I think. Even, you know, you go in and feel the rooms later on. But could you just imagine if you said, oh, let me go to the second week in March? I think that'll be okay, you know?
Right. And then I would have had to just set the book in my own apartment because that's the only place I could go.
I moved the chair this way today. I moved the chair that way today. It was funny when we moved home, the back here in my office, there was a big table. And I said to one of my friends, I don't know what to do. She goes, get rid of the table. She goes, you'd have a lot more room back there. And I was like, never thought about that. So it's at the point where we were like redoing our homes to try to figure out, let alone what was going on at the museum. You know what I mean?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. Oh, I know. I know. It was interesting writing a book during COVID.
Yeah.
Because, you know, the things I missed were things like jumping on the bus and seeing like a face in the crowd that I would think, oh, that's what the servant girl looks like, you know, or going to the theater and hearing dialogue and thinking, oh, right, that's, you know, that if I do that, this will fix this scene. And you didn't have any of that.
Mm-mm.
And so it was really tricky. But the one thing that an interviewer pointed out after the book came out was that, you know, in that second timeline in 1966, you have a model and she's trapped in the Frick over a certain number of days. She can't get out, right? It's only them. And she said, oh, you know, you quarantined your characters. I thought, oh yeah, I didn't even notice it, but I did.
Let's have them be like me. I want them to be like me. It'd be easier to write. No one else is coming in. I don't have to worry about any more dialogue.
Yes.
You know, Gloria Mousseau, I might be pronouncing her name wrong, is one of our readers from Saratoga Springs. She said her book group read The Magnolia Palace because of its connection to Saratoga Springs. She noted that Audrey Munson was a model for a memorial called The Spirit of Life. And can you share more about Audrey Munson and why you chose her as a model for Lillian's life, pun intended?
I love it. Yes. You know, what happened was as I was leaving that tour in January, I remember looking up above the door and there was this woman carved in stone above the door, this reclining nude. And I learned it was Audrey Munson and just went down this complete rabbit hole where she was this woman who was the celebrity model, the supermodel of the 1910s. And she posed for all the sculptors. And later on, I can show some photos and things of her and of her statues. And she's everywhere in New York. I realized I passed by her every day. She's everywhere. And she was this beautiful woman with these perfect neoclassical features. And she was known for the dimples on her lower back. And she posed nude for all these statues and artists. And then there was this terrible, terrible scandal where her landlord killed his wife, just like I explained in the book. And then the police, as they were investigating, found this black and white photo of Audrey Munson in a bathing suit from an ad that she'd done. And they said, oh, it must be a love triangle because he was her landlord. And they started hounding her. And so she and her mother escaped north into upstate New York. And things just didn't go well. She tried to get into silent films. That did not work. She eventually tried to die by suicide by drinking mercury. And finally, she was put into an asylum where she died in 1996 at the age of 104.
Wow.
Yeah. And at that time, she was buried in an unmarked grave.
She's all over the city. She's all over the city. Was anything written up when she died? Like, was there any big obit? And wow.
No, she was just disappeared. And then recently, there's been more and more people talking about her and wondering about her. And, you know, as I read about her, I just thought, here's this woman who's been lost to history. And she's really overshadowed by the men. We know the sculptors' names, but not hers. And I thought this is a great way to kind of bring her back to life in a way, as I explained very clearly in the author's note, where I kind of took off and made my character Lillian do something different.
Right.
But you know what was amazing is a few months after the book came out, I got an email through my author website. And it was a woman saying that she and her mother had read the book together, and they realized they recognized Lillian because her mother had been the caretaker to Audrey Munson in the asylum near the end of her life.
Who knew?
Yeah. And she said she was this really sweet woman with really sad eyes.
Oh, wow. And that was, oh, Jennifer saying that was me. Jennifer down in the chat is saying that was me.
I can't tell, Jennifer, I can't tell you how I talk about your email all the time, because I just find that so, the way, the past and the present can come together in that way is just so beautiful.
Well, Jill, I'm going to do these names really badly. Blouse, another one of our readers, mentioned The Curse of Beauty, the scandalous and tragic life of Audrey Munson, America's first supermodel by James Bone, as a book that inspired you. How much time did you spend doing research before you started writing?
Yeah, that book was so helpful, and I highly recommend it for anyone who wants to learn more about Audrey Munson. It was so helpful for me because I could learn, all right, what did she do? How much was she paid? What was her hourly rate, that kind of thing, just to help ground the story. And that's what I'm looking for as I'm researching. I'm looking for things that will just bring a room or a scene to life in a way that I'm not talking about the decor for a paragraph, because no one really wants to read that. And what was wonderful about the Frick is they had things like the payroll. So, it was a family of 3 who lived there, served by a staff of 27. And they had the list of all the people and what they were paid and what their roles were. And that helped in terms of forming the community within the house, which is really like its own city in many ways. And then they had things like dinner menus from a dinner party in 1915 with the different courses, the 7 courses that they were served. And so that kind of research was very helpful. I found a book on how to be a private secretary from 1905, and that was great.
These things that you're just like, to get deep into the research, what were those 27 people doing in the house besides they had their own, quarters downstairs? When they were upstairs, what were they summoned to do? And what was their small thing, but it became their job? It was really crazy days.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. It was amazing. And they all had to work together. And there were letters from a cook who was fired complaining that Mrs. Frick was unfair and she didn't steal anything. And, you had all these, because the Frick, the people who run the Frick now have such a wonderful digital archive, and they've kept everything. So you can really go on their website and see videos about what it was like back then, and the research they've done into the real servants, which is so much fun.
Ooh, that sounds really great. Jill also remarked and said how beautiful the cover is. And I've got my hardcover besides having my paperbacks here. And she said, notice I wore pink tonight to work with your cover. I did my
beautiful.
So she said this is a beautiful cover, and it really truly is. So she said it's stunning. And let's just talk about that for a little bit, because I take it, was this the first cover the publisher came to you with?
Yeah, they came to me with a few covers of different angles of the Frick Mansion. And this one worked the best. And then we kind of, we punched up some of the color on the girl a little bit, but yeah, they came with that, with the flowers wrapping around it. I thought that's fantastic because it's something different. Historical fiction, we joke that it's always the woman looking back, which this is, but I think the flowers just made it feel a little more modern and dynamic.
Well, do you know things too? There were those magnolia trees outside, and you think we can't grow those now? And how, were they hardy? Because they did have winter at that point.
They're still there. There's 3 of them, and they still bloom every spring. They're beautiful. Yeah, they're doing really well.
Wow, I want to try some at my house. Let me see if I can do this. We were hoping that Debbie would be joining us, but I don't see her here right now. So I'm going to jump on and ask her questions. How did you first get the idea to write books about iconic New York City buildings, and where do you start your research on a particular building? And at the start, I remember finding you when you first wrote about the Barbizon, because I had worked at Mademoiselle, and that's where the people who were the summer interns would stay, college kids. So where did you get, do you walk around and just say that would be great, or do people now send you ideas?
Oh, I get lots of ideas from around the country, which is wonderful. But yeah, the idea first came when I was looking for an apartment. And my broker took me to the Barbizon 63 condo, which had been the Barbizon Hotel for Women. And I knew a little bit about its history, that it was this place where people like Joan Didion and Grace Kelly and Lauren Bacall, stayed while they worked or studied in New York City. And then it became condo in around 2005, I think. And at that time, there were a dozen of the old time ladies still living there. They were in their 90s and they were grandfathered into rent controlled apartments on the 4th floor. So they paid, like $300 a month for a kitchenette. And the guy who got the penthouse paid 17 million.
Wow.
And it just started, I was a journalist at the time and I started thinking, well, what a great idea for a story about how the building and the residents in the city has changed over time. And the ladies who lived there were very private at that time and they wouldn't be interviewed. And I just couldn't shake it. And I started thinking, well, maybe I could write a dual timeline because I love reading them. And, because how hard can that be? It turns out it's really hard. And I decided to do, this dual timeline and set it in the 1950s when it was the Barbizon Hotel, and then modern times when it was a condo. So that's really where it came from. And then I thought, well, there's more buildings. So let's try the Dakota or let's try Grand Central. And it's been so much fun. I joke around that by the 30th book, I'll be doing the gas station on the corner of 11th Avenue.
The last one in the city. We'll be doing, please don't close. I need to be writing about you, But it's interesting because you could almost do at some point a walking tour during the day. You could do a day tour we could go all the places, like when we can really leave the house and go meet people again, do a gathering and just say, we're going to go to each of these places and we'll do something fun at each place along the way.
Sure.
And I think it's wonderful. Debbie has told me I should go on and ask the rest of your questions. So Debbie Moore is terrific. She's with us for every event and always has terrific questions. So what's your writing process? Do you write the story past and present completely? Do you go back and forth? And how do you keep track of and meld the stories together?
Oh my goodness, that is the hardest part, because what I tend to do is the first thing I do is really figure out who the characters are. Once I've done the research on the building, I'm filled with ideas for scenes and characters and storylines, but I figure out who the characters are. And then I figure out what the timelines are, where has the building changed? So say 1919, that's when Mr. Frick died. So that's a really good time. And then, what's another time? 1966, I hadn't worked in that yet. And so maybe I'll play around with that. And then I map out each timeline separately and then weave them together. And at that point, I'm usually drinking a lot of wine at night and eating a lot of chocolate during the day because it's very hard, especially because there's a mystery, right, in every book. So you can't screw up and leave a clue too early or too late. So you're making these two stories collide at the right time without giving too much away. And at that point, I have an outline. And so then I can work off that and I usually do the old timeline first because that tends to be the longer one. And then I do the modern one, and then I put them together and reread the whole thing and re-edit about 10 times.
Wow. Now, when does your agent see it? The agent sees it before the editor? Do they see it at the same time? What do you do on that process?
No, I work on it on my own, and then it goes to my agent after it's probably been through about eight or 9 revisions. And then she goes through it, and she's a real hands-on agent, which I love. She comes back. She has 2 assistants, Molly and Adam, and the 3 of them just work it. And then I get it back and I kind of take a deep breath and not think about it for 3 days and then dive back in, because they have really great changes that help move the story along, help deepen the characters. And once that's done, then it goes to my editor.
Then it goes to the editor. And then from there, the rest of the process starts. And then the editor comes back to you with another set of notes. And then do you confer with your agent and your editor again on what to do with those notes? Like if they come up with something, do you take everything? Or do you sometimes say, wait a second, I think I'm okay there? Or what happens?
I tend to have a very visceral reaction to edits. So either I'm like, oh my goodness, yes, that's brilliant. That will absolutely work. I can't wait to make that change. Or it's more like, well, I'm not sure, let me think about that one. And so I have, all the power in the world to decide what I should do or what I shouldn't. And they're both, my agent and my editor, are very wonderful like that. They're so easy to work with. And having been a journalist, I really respect editors. As you know, like a good editor makes the story better. And you can't see the forest for the trees sometimes when you're working. And so to me, it's just extra help and extra hands on deck to make it as good as it could be.
It's funny because people say, oh gosh, your newsletter is always so good and it's checked. It's really, we have this amazing editorial director, Tom Donadio, and Tom checks every email that I send out to the public, every single one, because I want to make sure I did not miss something that's either obvious or you didn't do this or that. And I think that that caring of that extra, I'm going to go take a look at this, makes a big difference for people, because I think a lot of people don't. I think that stuff comes out sometimes and you're like, wait a second, that doesn't make any sense at all. And you realize there was nobody, but when there's a really good editor, Linwood Barclay, the author, has this great line. He said, when he gets the comments back from his editor, it's like getting your medical tests back. And it's like, I'm going to live or I'm going to die. And he says, first, he said, when you get them, you don't open for a day. Then you can say, how many pages of notes are there?
Yeah.
Think I can do those. And then, okay, let me dive in and see what I'm going to do. But I think it's like a lot of fun to think of it that way.
It is. And a good editor, they do this editorial sandwich where they start with, it's really wonderful. You've really done it this time. Oh, great, great, great. There's a few things here. And then you have pages of things that could be worked on. And then it wraps up with, it's really great. We're so excited, and that just kind of softens the blow a little.
It's like, okay, this is what we're doing. Okay, folks, we'll move ahead together still. I'll keep writing.
And what, we were talking about this last week, is there's always something that gets through. Mm-hmm. And you have so many layers. You have your agent, your editor, you have the copy editor goes through it a couple times, then a proofreader, and they go through it a few times. And so, hopefully by the end it's ready to go, but there's always something in the first edition that needs to be tweaked.
And well, one of our readers said something about in the hardcover, because I read the hardcover and I totally missed this. How could they be taking the elevator when they were in the museum when the power was out? And I said, what were you reading? Were you reading a galley? Were you reading a hardcover? I was reading hardcover, and then I picked up the paperback and it changed. And it's a perfect example of something that everyone read. Copy editors read it, proofreaders read it, and no one catches something. And it's like the thorough writers say, when they get the gun wrong, you get a million notes. You can't get the gun wrong. So the power wrong, you know what I mean?
Right. And if you talk to any author, there's always something that gets through. There's just no avoiding it. And there's always a reader with an eagle eye who will catch it. Right. And so I thank them.
She said she was a teacher, and she said that's the reason that she saw it the most. She could see that right away. Of all the buildings that you've written about, Debbie's wondering, do you have a favorite? Is there a favorite child?
It's always the latest. And so I loved the Magnolia Palace. I loved writing about Helen Frick. To me, she was just a fun character. She was this real woman. So I had so much to work with in terms of bringing her to life. And I loved how strong-willed she was and slightly nasty and very prickly. And so that was really fun to work on an anti-hero like that. I really enjoyed Helen very much.
Yeah, and you had somebody real to go read everything about her. You could read old newspaper articles about her. There's so much that you could, like a very, very rich history, which makes it fun. So did you always see Lillian and Veronica as your characters as we see them right from the start, or did they evolve as you started writing?
They were pretty strong as they were. I like the idea of Veronica, the model in the 60s, being not a very good model, that she's a bit of a fish out of water and she just got this unfortunate haircut, which if you look up, there's a model named Peggy Moffatt, Moffatt from the 60s. Okay. And she's the one who I modeled the haircut from. And please Google it because it's hilarious. But she pulls it off. It's this bowl haircut. And I thought, oh, that'd be fun, have this model who just isn't very good and really shouldn't be there and gets fired. And so that was a nice contrast from Lillian, who I wanted her to be a successful model and have a real fall from grace. So it was a nice contrast for the two. So they pretty much started as they were and ended where I expected them to go.
Yeah, the bowl haircut I loved. It's just like, oh, chop that hair off. Yeah, oh, that's going to go well. That's really good. I remember when I worked at the magazine, every once in a while they said she cut her hair. Like, no, she can't cut her hair. We need it to be some way. And I remember sometime somebody was in the Caribbean. It was a very famous model. And I was about 23 at the time. And they said, she doesn't want to change her hair and she doesn't want to do the makeup. What should we do? And I said, put her on the phone. So they said, somebody from New York is on the phone. It was me. Okay. And I said, okay, who is paying you today? And she said, you are. And I said, and what were you hired to do? And she says, model. And I said, does that include the hair and the makeup? I said, yes. I said, then just listen to the other people and go do it. And she did it. And I was like, oh my gosh, that was like such a good moment because I just stopped a real problem in progress. But it's true because you want a model to show up looking a certain way. And it's like she cut her hair, she did something different. That's not the look we're looking for. So that could be a big problem when you're going on a shoot.
Yeah. Oh, absolutely. I'm impressed that in your 20s you could pull that off. That's pretty good.
I just got, well, I was on the phone. I mean, nobody knew who I was. It was just, I was the new person, you know? Marilyn Estes from Berkeley Heights asked this question. Did you have a book that you enjoyed researching the most? Is there one where the dive in was like, oh, this is like really terrific?
Yeah. The Dakota was really fun because there's this wonderful, the question asked earlier about what's the first thing I do when I research. The first thing I do is I call this historian here in New York called Andrew Alpern. And he's in his 80s. He's got this gray beard and he wears a very beautifully dressed always in a suit and a tie. And he knows every building in New York. He has a photographic memory of how New York's changed over time. And he knows all the stories. And so I take him out to lunch and I ask him, okay, what about this building? What do you know? And so that's the first thing I do. And with the Dakota, it was wonderful because there had just been published this wonderful coffee table sized book by Andrew Alpern. It's called The Greatest Apartment Building in the World. And it had everything in there. It had who lived there early on, floor plans, shots of the Upper West Side back, in the 1880s. And so that was so much fun. And going in there, trying to get in there, which was not easy. I had to pretend like I was a buyer for Lauren Bacall's apartment because it was on the market for 23 million. And so I got a tour of the apartment and I was all dressed up. I'm like, yep, I'm here for and I was looking at the fireplaces and the molding and, and then saying, oh, is there a gym?
Lauren must have a gym. She must have a gym. I love it.
Yeah. And so that's how I initially got in. Later, I did get to know a couple of people who lived there and got a full tour, but just trying to get in there and because it's a tough building to get into and just going in, it's so iconic. It felt like, wow, I'm in a really important place.
There was a night in December, I forget how many years ago it was now, and I walked past the Dakota with a friend who was working with me at the magazine. She was from Wyoming. I said, oh, Dakota, this is like this really beautiful place to live. And they have like this guard shack out in front and all that stuff. And that was the night that John Lennon was killed. And we realized we walked right past that guardhouse where we know the killer was standing outside. And I got home and I called her, I go, remember that building we walked past before? That's and we couldn't believe it, but it was that iconic moment of just having been there and that beautiful building, and then that's the evening. And we were right by that guard shack where we buy the killer, is that crazy?
It was a tragic night, tragic. I'm so glad you weren't there when,
no, goodness. And he was supposedly there for hours before like Casey joined. And I'm like, oh my gosh. Well, Terry is going to join us from Norwich, Connecticut. Let's do this camera thing. And there we go. This is working.
Terry.
Terry, thanks so much for joining us.
Oh, I know, finally. First, I'm very pleased to meet you, Fiona. It's really a pleasure to meet you. Thank you for having such entertaining books because it's just been, I don't know, I just kind of fell into them. I know what I like and it just kind of popped up and I started reading them and took off.
Oh, thank you so much. I really appreciate that.
Actually, my first question is very similar to the one you just answered. From reading 4 of your novels. From reading 4 of them already. There were 2 written, or they're all written with 2 different time periods. It looks like most of them are, from what I've come across. Do you ever feel swept away by one time period when writing, when you find it challenging to switch back and forth with all the characters? Like you pretty much answered the question where you will write the first one first and then the other, or do you get kind of, taken away and?
Yeah, it's interesting because say I'm writing the one set at Grand Central, the masterpiece, it's the 1920s and it was such an interesting time period in terms of fashion and clothes and what people ate and what they thought. And so I get so, buried in that. And then suddenly I have to switch to 1970s when Grand Central was dark and dangerous. And a completely different building in many ways. You know, it was about to be torn down. And so that's just jarring to make that switch. So I usually have to give it a few days to let the earlier story fade away before I can jump into the modern one, just so I kind of get some separation.
And so you pretty much do one at a time?
Yes.
You complete one before you do another.
Yes.
That
Yeah.
seems to be practical, but I think it would be more challenging if you went back and forth, but that would be kind of confusing too.
Yeah. Yeah. Go
I
ahead.
do have a question, and this is really I prefer this one as opposed to the other. The last two novels I read were more dramatic. It was The Chelsea Girls and The Address.
Mhm.
And I felt that I gained more perspective of my own feelings after reading them. It just changed me. I almost didn't want to read The Chelsea Girls. It just, I didn't know about the Red Scare too much.
Mhm.
And I just said, oh, this is going to be too political and I'm not going to like it. And so I almost just stopped. And I just kept going with it. And there was some real hardcore things going on. And it was more real than I thought it was going to be. So it was kind of a surprise. And so I just wonder what your hopes, what you would want the reader to take away from your book. Because I personally felt things change within me, how I look at things after.
Yeah. Oh, thank you. I'm so glad to hear that. And yeah, you know, I'm so interested in how things have changed, especially for women
Mhm.
over time, and also how they haven't. And then also how politically and socially we kind of do these cycles where things go forward and then they move back a little and then they go forward. And that's what really strikes me as I'm researching. And so for the address, you know, I wanted Laura's story, or Sarah's story. I have to keep everybody straight. Sarah's story, you know, in the 1880s part, not everybody has a happy ending in my books, you know, and everything isn't always wrapped up in a bow. And I wanted to do that in order to kind of pay homage to the women in the 1880s who went through things similar to what Sarah went through.
Pretty horrific. And
Yeah.
I mean, people suffer nowadays with certain degrees of the mental illness. And, you know, there are times where, you know, you don't know what's going to happen to you. It touched me personally where, you know, in my life personally, in my earlier days, I had struggles myself. And I totally felt what she was going through. So I just felt what she felt. Like the place where she went wasn't as intense, but I experienced it myself several times, and I just felt what was going on.
Yeah, I think that lack of control is just so scary, isn't it? And I think all of us at one time or another in our lives feel that things are out of control.
Yeah, and you don't even know it at the time how much you're really struggling. And then from some hardcore situation, you find something real deep inside and you can just get over it. I mean, you just things may look really bad. I mean, you know, your situation may look bad and everything, but you just have to find that one little thing and go from there. You know,
Yeah.
you just find that inner quality of life, and you do have to find it on your own. Nobody can do it for you.
Yeah, I agree. I think so. And you know, the thing with the Chelsea Girls is, again, it's a tough time in America's history. And I was very inspired by this woman in her late 90s who'd been an actress in New York back then, very similar to Hazel's journey, where she was this, you know, an understudy all the time on Broadway to Fay Wray and all these famous people, but never went on and, you know, really struggled. But then the Red Scare hit, and she watched as people had their careers ruined and sometimes their lives.
Yeah.
And she was so angry about it. Even then, she felt like people didn't know. And I just thought, you know, this is an important story to write about. Just here's what we went through here in New York, and these were theater actors, but it, you know, it was a kind of thing going on in the country. And I just learned that Kate Quinn's next book will be something to do with the Red Scare in Washington, D.C. So I'm very excited to read that, because I'm sure she'll do a great job with it.
Yeah, well, I totally have enjoyed reading your books and I thank you so much.
Oh, thank you for coming on tonight. That's wonderful.
All right, thanks for joining us. We appreciate it. Let's do this. So, okay. For Kay has a question. Kay from Savannah, Georgia. She sent it. She was going to appear on screen, but I'm going to do the question for her because I don't see her. She wrote years ago to say that she does not laugh when she reads books. And we had this whole thing, as I said, I laughed out when I read the book. She said, I don't do this. And we bantered back and forth about this in a number of emails. And I said, this one made me laugh, didn't make her laugh. It was a real test. But she told me recently that she does laugh occasionally, but it takes a lot. So here she's got an interesting question for you. As a fan of yours and as a fan of historical fiction, I've noticed recently that this genre does not lend itself to humor, and I'm kind of missing it. So do you notice it too? And do you ever find yourself withholding it because it doesn't seem appropriate to the genre?
Oh, what a good question. It's so interesting because I was just reading Amy Popel's latest book, The Sweet Spot, which is, it's modern, contemporary, but it's so funny and you do laugh out loud. She just captures the inanity of life in a way that's incredible. And so, yeah, I think there is humor in it. There are parts where I crack myself up as I'm writing it, but I think with historical fiction, you have people under usually very dire circumstances trying to make their way at usually a time in the world when things were difficult. And so, yeah, there may not be as much humor as you would think. I'm trying to think of books that have that humor. I think Kate Quinn does it again. I think she does. I remember The Rose Code laughing.
Okay.
As I read that. But yeah, that's such an interesting question. I'm working on a book now that I hope a character will have a lot of humor. So so we'll see. We'll see if I can pull it off. She'll tell me.
Okay, we'll definitely let you know. I think that'll be the best. Bobby from Loveland, Ohio asked me to share this question. It speaks to the editing process. And she said, I enjoyed the books very much. And it was, they were exploring, and she's the one that they said about the no electricity. And it was just really funny because I noticed it was changed. And we talked about this earlier. So does something usually get caught in the editing process? Where does that moment usually come? Do you see it, or does the copy editor sometimes say, couldn't be possible?
Usually it's the copy editor and the proofreader catch those things because, if they've gotten through me and the editor and my agent, there are things that are just sometimes hard to see. Maybe they're somewhere on the page that it's easy your eye glides over it.
Mm-hmm.
But a good proofreader and a good copy editor will catch them.
They'll catch those things. I think we're going to switch for a couple of seconds. Keep your questions going in the Q&A portion. Remember, don't put them in the chat, put them in the Q&A. Eagle Eye Tom Donadio, who edits everything, is looking in the Q&A, not in the chat for the questions, everybody. And I've seen some of them going in the chat. I'm catching you folks. I am going to share the screen with, we'll have Fiona share the screen. And she is going to give a little bit the slide presentation to us. I'm going to make her the host. There we go. And she's going to do a little slideshow for us.
Yeah, I just thought I'd show some of the things that show my research and some of the background on some of the people, which I thought might be fun. Can you see that? Is that working?
Totally working.
Yay. So here is the Frick, and that's one of the magnolia trees. They're on the left.
Okay.
In fact, that's one of three, and it has this beautiful green lawn that ends up on Fifth Avenue. And so that's unusual. You usually don't have houses in New York with lawns. Mm-hmm. And Mr. Frick wanted the house set back he didn't want to take up the entire footprint when he built it. And so here's the first floor. When you first walk in, this is what you see. And the organ that's mentioned in the book, and the organist plays a big part, is tucked right around that niche or on the other side of the grandfather clock. And here are just some shots of the actual rooms that are there at the Frick. As you can see, the artwork really takes precedence. That was Mr. Frick's true love. And so every room, the artwork is most important. These are these progress of love panels, which are these really beautiful kind of very dreamy, romantic panels about the kind of courtship, from courtship to marriage, which are quite something. And this is this room that normally in a Gilded Age mansion at that time, it would be the ballroom. But because Mr. Frick wanted his art, Here you have his gallery, and there's Turners, Renoirs. I think there are 36 or 7 Vermeers in the world, and 3 of them are at the Frick, which is incredible. And if you've read the book, you see through that kind of archway there, that's Mr. Frick's office. And, you know, in the book, they find the diamond in a secret panel in the office, and that panel is actually there. And you can see the little keyhole to open it up. But I hope when the Frick right now is under renovation, and I hope when it reopens, people don't try and open that panel to find the diamond, because that would be bad. Here's a shot of Mr. Frick. And he was just this, oh, he was a very difficult man. You know, he was really cutthroat, a ruthless businessman. And when I wrote him, I imagined it was Anthony Hopkins, the actor, because they both have very blue eyes, but it helped me just soften him a little as I wrote him. It just, to imagine Anthony Hopkins helped, because the man was so difficult. Here's his wife, Adelaide, on her wedding day.
That dress.
Isn't it great? Yeah, here, I'll go back. I don't mean to rush. Yeah, isn't that just amazing?
It's interesting to see how bridal fashions change through the decades, through the years of, you know, look at what we wore then.
Yes, and then the waist. Can you
Yes.
imagine? And then here's the Frick Mansion under construction. And when Mr. Frick hired the architects to do it, and in fact, they're the same architects who made the New York Public Library, he told them that he wanted something that was simple and conservative in every way. And when you look at this, you think, oh, that's crazy. But when you compare it to, say, the Vanderbilt's, you know, chateaus that were plopped down on Fifth Avenue, it was fairly subtle, I would say.
Mhm.
And here is Helen and Henry. So this is his daughter, who of course plays a big part in the book. And here is a great shot of Helen Clay Frick. So this was a year after her dad died. You can see she just was a woman, a very strong-willed woman, who, you know, lived her life the way she felt she should live it. Here's the carving of Audrey Munson above the door that caught my eye.
Mhm.
And then here is Audrey Munson. And you can see she has those, you know, heavy lidded eyes and a very aquiline nose and a small chin. So she was really just the ideal beauty of her day. And here's just some of the places you can find her. There's 3 of her at Columbus Circle. She's in front of the Brooklyn Museum. She rises out of the fountain in front of the Plaza Hotel. Here she is in front of the New York Public Library. And that's the Firemen's Memorial, which is on the Upper West Side. And then the New York Municipal Building. She's at the very top of that. And this one's my favorite. This is the Titanic Memorial.
Wow.
And I just think that's just a stunning shot of her.
Where's the Titanic Memorial? Where is that?
That is on 106th and Broadway. It's a weird little, tiny little park in an area of town that, you know, not a lot of tourists end up. But it's this kind of hidden by trees, and you go inside and it's this beautiful fountain with this woman, you know, looking over it. And it was done in honor of Ida and, oh goodness, I'm forgetting her name, the 2 Strausses who were on the Titanic. And the wife was supposed to get on a lifeboat, and she gave her maid her fur coat and told her to take it because she was going down with her husband. And so they
Wow.
went down with the ship.
Wow.
Yeah, they lived on the Upper West Side. And here's just some of the research. You can see floor plans. There were a couple great biographies written by a Frick descendant that were really helpful, and some books that the Frick collection released. And then finally, here is that dinner party list I was telling you about. So here, you know, it looks like there's a lot of people coming to dinner. And on the very bottom right there, you see they had melons, they had terrapin a la Maryland, pigeons rhodus, whatever that is. It's just so much fun to kind of, and they'd have who played the organ, who played the harp, and they had a soloist. So you could just get a sense of what life was like back then, which I find so much fun. Oh, and here's the payroll. So here you can see all their names on the left,
Right.
what they did: butler, chore woman, chore man, parlor maid, first chambermaid, kitchen man, hall girl. I wonder what she did, the hall girl.
Yeah, carry the garbage out. I mean,
Right. And you can see how much they were paid. And so that kind of thing, again, was just really fun to play with and put into the book. So I'm going to stop sharing here and make you the host
Wow.
again.
Well, they had, I really loved where there was somebody who was an engineer. He was the one that was paid the most. And I guess he was the engineer for the building, or whatever. I just thought that was those kinds of little artifacts. Now, here's a question behind you. Do you keep the books that you use for research? Like, do you have, this is my books from this book, and this is my books from this book for research?
I do. There's so many. They're out in the hallway, actually, in a cabinet out there. But I do keep them stacked up. Like I have a big stack right here. I do try, and if there is a book I can download on my Kindle, I will do that, because then I can highlight things and search for it easier than in a book. But there's some things that you just need the book in order to, access what you need.
Well, the other thing too is, if you have something like, say, a page, and you say, oh, I don't think I'm going to use this. Do you put it someplace where you don't put it in garbage? You put it someplace just in case I want to come back to that later? Or what
You
do
know
you
what I do? Yeah, I use this wonderful program called Scrivener. So if there's any writers out there who are doing historical fiction, I highly recommend it. It's called Scrivener. And it's really a fascinating program, because it seems really hard, but you don't have to use it all. I use the basics. And that means you can have all of your manuscript on very easily accessible, as well as all your research. And so if I need to look at a web page, I can have my manuscript on the top half of my screen, pull up the web page, see what I need to, there's a woman wearing a dress. I can easily, describe the dress. And anything you throw away goes into trash, but it's kept in trash, so you won't lose anything. It's a great program, and it makes it so much easier to write historical fiction.
Yeah, and sometimes you might need something later on. Wait, I need that segue, or I need whatever. I'm going to go back.
Yeah.
Well, a number of people, okay, Cindy Roselle, who couldn't join us tonight, she's from Miami Beach, Florida. She said, does your experience as an actor help you stage scenes in your novels?
I think it does. Yeah. I came to New York as an actress, and I worked for about 10 years doing Broadway and off Broadway and that kind of thing. And it was a lot of fun. And then I eventually thought, now it's not as much fun. So what should I do? And I went to Columbia Journalism School and kind of went off on a different tangent. And acting was great because it teaches you about a dialogue, right? Because a play is all dialogue. There's no, here's what the playwright thinks. And so as you're reading it or acting it, you understand you have to bring a lot more to the table than just the words on the page. There has to be more going on. And then in terms of stage managing a scene, if there's a lot of people in a scene, you need to make it clear who's where. And I think that helps, having been, blocked on a stage where you're told, okay, stand here and then move over there. And also imbuing your characters with something that's beyond what they're saying or feeling. So their actions are also exemplifying whatever's going on underneath. And so that way you can bring a scene alive on so many levels. And I think that comes straight from having been a stage actress, for sure.
Yeah, and how to get people from here to here. How are they going to move? What are they going to do? They have to walk around a column. What is it going to be? So your writing, I think, is very visual and I feel like I'm in each of the places. And I bet a lot of our readers would say the same thing too, is you feel like you're traveling with those characters and you're seeing the rooms. And it's true. If you were already acting, you knew that blocking kind of thing, blocking. You're going to block me from doing this? We just blocked everybody from hearing us last week. We really got blocking.
We did that very well.
And she's asking, why did you switch from being an actress to being an author?
What happened was, as I got into my late 20s, I saw all my friends who were women who were a little older were having a hard time getting work, especially those who were ingenues, the young girl type. And then I saw all my male friends aging into these really great character roles. And I thought, well, that's not fair, and I thought, well, what else do I want to do? And I had no idea. And this was the 90s, so it was way before the internet. And I actually went down to NYU. I was in New York, and I went down to NYU and I took the Briggs-Myers test to figure out what your personality is. And then that tells you what you should be. And it told me I should either be a journalist or a policeman.
I love that.
And I just don't see myself as a cop. And so I thought, okay, a journalist. And, back then in the 90s, like you knew there's no way to know things. There was no internet. There was nowhere to go, well, how does that happen? And I thought, well, I'll apply to Columbia because, that's nearby. And so I applied to Columbia Graduate School and got in and did this wonderful master's program, which was great because it really taught me about how to shape a story, how to write a story, and just these mentors and people who I'm still in touch with today. And then I started being a journalist. And then eventually, after about 10 years or so, I came up with the idea for the dollhouse. And then suddenly my life took a sharp turn. And that was in my late 40s. So I always say, you know, go out and live life and then write a book, because
Mhm.
I think it makes it all worth it.
You are the third author that I've spoken with this week. As today, I spoke with somebody who's in her early 50s. Yesterday, I was talking to Ken Kruger earlier this week, and he said his first thing was published in his 40s. And now you're saying the same thing. And it's very interesting because we were talking about life experience that you have, because the story that he just did is an audio original, was a novella that he wrote when he was 20s, and then took it completely apart now and 70, and how he reworked the story, but he sees, like, you know, what happens along the way. And I think it's so interesting because I think you have to have some life experience to come in to be able to sit there and say, like, what am I going to do? And it's not to say, before I get blasted, the writers in their 20s and their teens don't know what they're doing. I'm not saying that, but I think that to do books like what you're doing and have that sense of history of what's gone on in the city, like living in the city for more than 3 years, you see a completely different city. The city we see now, in a lot of ways, someplace where is more like the 70s as
Mhm.
far as danger, like possibility of danger, which we didn't see for a very long period of time. So it's all this cyclical kind of stuff that goes on. And if you haven't been through it before, you think it's new. And you're like, did this already. You should see what Times Square used to look like, honey. You know?
Oh yeah. Yeah, it's so true. And New York is the perfect microcosm of that, as
Mhm.
as it grows and then has, you know, issues and then figures itself out. And yeah, I've been here now for 35 years. So and I like to think that, you know, when you first come to New York, that year is preserved in amber.
Mhm.
And that is the perfect New York, right? Because you're still learning all about it. You don't know what's around that corner, and you're just surprised and awed and overwhelmed by being in the city and finally being here. And then you grow older and things change and buildings get torn down and new ones get put up. And you're like, no, that used to be the bar that we, you know, and so as it changes, it's hard to not to be resistant. And I
Mhm.
think it's okay to let the city change in certain ways, as long as we preserve things like Grand Central.
Yeah. And the office building, or last office building in the city, I think the one that you visit us in, it used to be an apartment building. And the bathrooms in there were really big because there were bathtubs originally in the bathroom. So they always say we should have affordable housing in Midtown. I'm like, oh, do I know the building for you? Like,
Yeah, the Wyoming, yeah.
this was, and the Wyoming was right across the street. I remember
That's right.
I wanted Fiona to write about the Wyoming. So she would sit in my office and work. And it was right across the street from where our office was. And I was sending her pictures going, but look at the floor plans. Don't you think this would be really fun? Okay, why don't we just go and visit it? And we can say that we want to, like, you want to write about it, and we'll go visit. And we used to watch them doing construction. I'd write, I think you should be coming and doing the Wyoming. Really, because guys, I wanted her to work out of my office. I thought it'd be fun. So
That would have been fun, actually. Working out of your office would have been a hoot. I get all the books that I want.
yeah, that's exactly. We have our own little library there. We really did have it going. So before we go to questions, let me ask real quick. Cindy's actually asking the next book. What's next? These are her guesses: the Met, Lincoln Center, the Cloisters, the Central Park Boathouse. Those are her questions. And I know the answer. The answer is
The Radio City Music Hall. Yeah, the next book comes out on June 13th, and it's called The Spectacular. And it takes place in 1956 from the point of view of a young girl who wants to be a rockette. And it's a little different because it mainly takes place in 1956. It's a pretty straight timeline with a little bit of jumping into 1992 of a rockette looking back on her life. But it's mainly in this one timeline, and it includes a real life bomber who threatened New York for 16 years by planting bombs in very famous buildings, including Grand Central, Radio City, the New York Public Library. And so it's a bit of it's glamour, it's a love story, it's a thriller, and I'm really excited to get it out in the world.
oh, I can't wait. The cover looks beautiful. The cover looks spectacular. So let's just go there. Are you working on a next book like at the same time? Are you working on something else?
I am, you know, the pipeline as the book gets, you know, I turned it in back in December. And so, you know, then that book gets into the sales team and starts going off on the pipeline to publication. And so in the meantime, I am starting on a new book, and it's still early days, so I don't want to reveal just yet, but I'm very excited, just playing around with it. We'll see where it goes.
Well, you know what's also is you changed your pub time because your pub time didn't used to be June. This year it's going to be June. What date in June?
Yeah. You know, because I'm touring so much now, which is wonderful, just getting around all over the United States to see people. I needed 18 months in between books and
Mhm.
not a year. And so that just gives me a little more breathing time to go and travel if I need to, and also just take time to step back and give the manuscript a rest, because sometimes you have to do that.
Well, and I also feel that most people cannot write while they're traveling, and you can't write while you're promoting. There'll become a time where you can only talk about the spectacular for about 8 to 10 weeks, and that will be it. And nobody will want to know about anything else. And you can't be writing a book at the same time. Your brain just can't sort back and forth because they're asking you very in-depth questions about something you wrote about 18 months ago. And it's like, let me reread my own book. You know,
Right. It's a little bit like revisiting old friends. It's like, oh yeah, right. Because you've already started on this new path with these new friends, and you have to go back and say, oh, right, the Rockette. Oh, yes, I remember this.
I remember that. I remember what they did. Kick high, kick high.
Good.
Tom, let me see if you've got questions for us. Move to some Q&A. I know there's more we can talk about.
Yes, we have some really good questions here. First, Anissa asks, did you have to take any scenes out of this book or any of your other books as it did not fit right?
Oh, what a good question. You know, I didn't take scenes out, but I added scenes in. About a third away through the book, I realized I needed another character in order to throw suspicion away on another character. So I invented Bertha, the maid. She hadn't been in there at all. And so then I had to go back and weave her into the story because I just needed someone else. There needed to be someone else to kind of keep the reader guessing as to what really happened. And so Bertha came in a little late. So it was in fact adding scenes.
Judith asks, do you have to choose between a number of possible storylines because your research offers so many possibilities?
You know, as I'm researching, there are moments as I'm reading something and like my neck will start to twitch, or, you know, I'll feel that tingly feeling of, oh, this is good. And whenever I feel that, I know I'm on the right track. And with every book so far, knocking on wood, that has happened. And so I've been able to figure out what the right timelines are and what the character should be. And so you're really taking these true facts, like the fact that a family lived in the New York Public Library, and building a scaffold around that of fiction. But when I read about things like the family living in the library, when I read that New York Times article, just happened to come across it, I feel like, oh yes, here we are. And so I just, you know, people ask, do you use an assistant in research? And I couldn't, because I need to be able to feel that tingly feeling when I'm on the right path.
Mm-hmm.
Terry asks, you've written about several iconic New York City buildings with terrific attention to architectural details. Have you studied architecture, or do you have an architect on speed dial?
No, I do not. I did not. In fact, you know, writing about the art in the Magnolia Palace, I took an art history class pass fail in college and I passed. So that's as much as I got. But I do have architect. Yeah, I do have my architectural historian, Andrew Alpern, who is my go-to person, actually, if I have a question about, okay, how did a hydraulic elevator work in the Dakota in the 1880s? Like, how did that work? What happened there? And so that's very helpful, because no, you know, if anything, as a journalist, I learned how to find the right people to ask the questions to. And that's the key. And I love going out and interviewing people in person versus over Zoom if I can, because that's how you find all the gold that can go into the story.
I have a question. Have you ever interviewed him on your website or had anything? Because he sounds like he's been so key to what's gone on with you. Is there an article where the two of you spoke or something like that?
No, there's not. There should be. That's a really good idea. He's come to all my book launches. And so he's always there in the front row, and he always gets a shout out. But yeah, it'd be fun to,
That's for your publicist, and off the book page piece about the two of you and how you work together.
Thank
and
you.
How you take them to lunch. There's your idea.
You can tell you're in the business. I could tell. That's a brilliant idea.
Publicist is going to love me in the morning.
That would be a fascinating discussion for sure.
It would be. It would be great. I'll host that one if you want me to do it.
Great.
Amy asks, have you ever started a book or researched a landmark in New York City, but then realized it wasn't the right story that you wanted to tell?
I have. It was so interesting. I was looking into Carnegie Hall.
Mm.
And, when they built these studios up above it, where people like photographers or opera singers or teachers or dancers could have a studio to either teach or work in. And there were about 100 and, I can't remember now, 150 or something of them. And people like Marlon Brando lived there, and Mark Twain passed through there. Bill Cunningham lived there. And I thought, oh, that's a good idea, but I couldn't find the outside hook, like what was going on in New York at that time that I could play with. One thing was that Carnegie Hall was about to be demolished, but I felt like I'd done that already in the Grand Central book, and it would be repetitive. And so I put it aside. And then very luckily, I was asked through Amazon to write a short story last year as part of their anthology series. And so I thought, oh, it's perfect for a short story. And so I wrote this short story about a classical pianist who is having problems with her fingers and can't play. And so she ends up kind of finding this warren of rooms and people, very quirky, eccentric people at the top of Carnegie Hall. And she goes in there to kind of recover and find herself again. And that's called To a Wild Rose, or no, it's called A Wild Rose. And that's on Amazon. It's a great audiobook, and I highly recommend it. There's some wonderful ones in that collection.
I just want you to know that once again, if you'd worked out of our office and you'd look that way, forget the Wyoming across the street. You could have you could have been there. I'm telling you, you could have been there.
That's right. You're right there in the 50s. Yes.
I don't know. We missed our opportunity. What's next, Tom?
Sheila asks, was the character of the art curator Joshua based on a real person?
Yeah, Joshua, I wrote Magnolia Palace in the 2020s. And of course, there was so much going on in America at that time that it made me start wondering about what's missing from the Frick's walls of art, and that are paintings by diverse artists or even paintings of diverse people. And so I started reaching out to curators and art experts who were Black to ask, what was it like when you were coming up and studying? And they shared their experiences with me. And these are top people who talked about going into like a workshop and sitting down, and for the leader of the workshop to ask them if they were in the wrong room, or, raising their hand during a tour and never getting called on. And so I started thinking about creating this character, and he's named after Joshua Johnson, who is the first recognized Black painter in America, as I mentioned in the book. And I just thought, we could see the Frick through his eyes and maybe open things up a little bit, and maybe open up, our model's eyes, Veronica's eyes, as to what else is going on in the world, and that we don't have to live in this kind of Eurocentric art history past. What about the future? What's coming up? And so it was interesting to kind of bring that into it in a way, and, make sure it's done hopefully respectfully, so that it makes people think, oh yeah, what about that? What else is going on? And it's amazing because if you go on the Frick's website, they do this great partnership with the Ghetto Film School, which is a Bronx-based film school for students. And they bring them into the Frick, and they're allowed to, have the run of the place, and they learn all about the art. And then they get to do short films. They write and film these shorts right in the Frick. So it might be about a security guard, or it might be about this. And they're really wonderful. You can find them on the website. And so the Frick is very committed to, diversity and asking these questions, which I think are good ones to be asked.
Linda asks, how long does it typically take you to write a book from start to finish?
Yeah, it's usually about 1.5 years. So it's about 3 or 4 months of research. And then I write a very quick first draft. I tend to not go back and edit because I have to get it all out to see if it works. And that takes about 3 or 4 months. And then editing for another, however much time is left, another 8 months. And that's where it goes to my agent. So it's about 1.5 years total these days.
Do you have a crash thing towards the end of like, okay, I've got a weekend, I've got to get it done by Monday, or are you usually kind of pacing yourself? Because I know a lot of people lock themselves in the room and go 3,000 more words or bust.
Right. No, I'm in college and high school. I was one of those people who turned in the papers early. Like I have a real fear of doing anything that goes late or missing a deadline. And so I do tend to really, pack it in early and make sure I have lots of room to take my time and get things in on time, if not a little early. Yeah, I'm totally dorky that way. It's embarrassing.
It's good. It's a good thing. It's not a bad
Good
thing.
to be
It's a good thing.
dorky.
I remember typing papers when I was in college, and I mean, it was typing, guys, really,
Yeah.
there were no computers, and I would be taping things together. That was editing, was cutting and taping. And then I'd have this thing, because I always write at night. I'm not a morning person. And I'd throw it down the hallway and I'd reel it in to type before I went to the class. And you were hoping that the one person in the apartment that had the electric typewriter would let you use hers, because then it might go a little faster. And you think about now, like how much, if you got to edit something or change it or whatever, it's not retyping the entire thing, which is what it was like before.
Yeah, I can't imagine that. I was looking at like Virginia Woolf's original manuscripts and how you had to just redo the whole thing over if you wanted to change anything. We're very lucky.
Very, very lucky. Are you going to be touring with the next book? I'm going to.
Yeah.
We'll be touring.
Yeah, we're putting it together now. And so I'm very excited. It'll probably be announced in the next month or two. But hopefully we'll be coming your way. I'd love getting out to see people. And I'm also doing a lot of touring separate from that. So if you look at my website on the events page, you'll see I'll keep on adding to it as more things come down. In the next few months, I'll be hitting Florida, Kansas City, Florida again. So there's stuff going on. So please check in.
The other thing is too, do you have a newsletter that people can sign up for to stay on top of what you're doing?
Yeah, definitely. If you go to my website, you can see subscribe to the newsletter right from there. And I don't overdo it. As closer to the book coming out, I'll let you know if there's a Goodreads giveaway, if there's the event schedule, that kind of thing. So you can definitely stay in the loop.
Great.
Thank you.
Well, speaking of events, Sparta Bookworm says, I'd love an in-person event that includes a tour of the landmarks there in Fiona's books and cocktails afterwards.
I like that idea very much. Wouldn't that be fun? Yeah. It's, I joke around that whenever I pick a building, I close it. Like I chose the New York Public Library and then everything closed for COVID. And then I chose the Frick and then it closed to get renovated. So
How about the Chelsea that didn't open? So they
it just reopened. It reopened and it's fabulous. If anyone can get to the Chelsea Hotel, I highly recommend it. There's all these cool bars and this great restaurant, and they didn't over renovate it, so it really feels like it was back in the day. It's great.
I think we're maybe 1 or 2 books away from a weekend with Fiona in New York. It'll be like, we'll go to this building, go to that building. She'll show up at lunch at this place, and then we'll go. I don't know. I think we're putting together like a weekend, there'll be a weekend package to spend with Fiona. We have people who are agreeing with me in the chat.
Yeah, we'll get a tour bus and just, do it right.
And it's like people get from, well, you're going to show up at this point and you're going to show up at that point, and they'll take tours, and I think we're pulling something together here. This would be a new thing where we can all like talk to each other again and be out,
And in fact, if you go to, I'm trying to think where it is. If you go to Instagram on my bio, it takes you to, Linktree, which has all these different things. And at the very bottom of that is an Apple Maps guide to all of my locations.
Wow.
So if you're ever in New York, you can just go on Instagram, go to my bio and look for the Apple map. And that will show you where everything is, all the buildings.
That'd be fun. People are saying I
great,
can join you on the tour. Okay, I'll join you.
Linda asks, I found Helen to be an incredibly interesting character and person. Did Helen become a more tolerant person in real life as she seemed to in the book?
She was so interesting. She never married. She never had kids. Her love was that library, the art reference library that she built next door. And she ended up moving to Bedford, New York, and she had a farm there. And she had lots of dogs. And she, really lived her life the way she wanted to. She was fiery and opinionated, and she got into arguments, and she fought with the board of the Frick. She'd donate money to I think University of Pittsburgh, and then didn't like what they were doing. And, there was just so much drama in her life. So she was pretty hard-headed throughout her life. But I did talk to one of her grandnieces who was just lovely. And she showed me some wonderful photos of her on the farm. And she said she was really sweet to her dogs. and to her nieces and nephews. She was a really wonderful aunt and very loving. And so I think, you know, she did have a really soft side as well.
Stacy asks, do you have favorite decades to write about?
Oh, fun question. Yeah, I love the 1920s. I
Mm,
think
let's
there
look
was,
at that.
yeah, like I think I'll do with the fashions. I like the 1880s, the 1920s, the 1950s.
Okay.
Are wonderful. And yeah, I think those are probably my top three. And it all has to do with the clothes, which is funny. I think those are the clothes I would love to wear if I could.
The shirtwaist opportunities, the shirtwaist dress. You know, you think about how fashion changed and how women leaving the house to go to work, or women leaving to do this. The idea that in the 60s, I did not realize why so many cars were sold, because it was finally the time that people got a second car at their house. And that's the reason they did really well. And then it was like, I think it was the 90s or the 80s was when the third car came into the house. And these were these moments where the economy lifted just because of something like that. But you're also talking about the fashion and the looks of what was going on. I mean, even that show that was not really great about the golden age, like the Gilded Age.
Gilded Age.
Like, not that great on the way they were doing. They must have taken the really wrong voice lessons, is all I could say. But see, the streets were dirt. And to
Mhm.
see how you traveled from point A to point B, and the servants' entrance in the back. My son's girlfriend is actually working at a building in the city, and they have the back entrance, and everybody goes in the back entrance. If you're anybody bringing anything up and down, and then the front is just for the guests. And I find that fascinating, just
Yeah.
still happening.
And even like in the Barbizon Hotel for women, even in the late 60s, you couldn't wear pants across the lobby. You had to be wearing a skirt if you wanted to come or go. It's just the rule.
Rule, this is what happens.
Yeah.
We have another question from Stacy. Is there anyone you would like to co-write with?
Oh, you know, a few years ago, MJ Rose, who's a wonderful author, and we came up with the idea when we were both touring at the same place, and we were stuck in an airport, and we came up with the idea of doing an anthology, and it's called Stories from Suffragette City. And it's all about the big march for suffrage rights in 1915 in New York, when all these thousands of women marched up Fifth Avenue. And so we asked people like Jamie Ford and Chris Bohjalian and Christina Baker Klein to write stories from a character's point of view of that day. And that was wonderful because everybody kind of did their own story and then came together. And it was just a remarkable experience to work with all these people who I admire so much. It was a lot of fun. And I loved the way it turned out.
Great. We have a question from an anonymous attendee who says, I read The Magnolia Palace after I read The Personal Librarian and loved the similar setting and the fascinating story set in New York City. My book group is interested in visiting the Frick and the Morgan someday. Have you spoken with Marie Benedict? Both books were fabulous, and I've gone to both museums and was very impressed.
Oh, isn't she wonderful? She's great. Yes, I absolutely adore her. And I love her writing. I thought Personal Librarian was great. You know what's so funny is when I was researching the Frick book, I talked to a former curator from the Frick who was now at the Morgan. And I was talking to him at the Morgan about the Frick, and he said to me, you know, there's this great story about, you know, JP Morgan and his librarian. And he was telling me, and I was thinking, that's a great story idea. And then I think it was announced soon after that you know, they were doing it, her and Victoria, and they did such a good job. And yeah, you know, I think visiting the Morgan Library, definitely do. It's such a great spot. And the Frick, even though it's under renovation, they've moved most of the artwork to what they call the Frick Madison, which is a building just a few blocks away. And it's a wonderful way to see the artwork. And I highly recommend it. It's really a fun trip. And you can see a number of the paintings that are described in the book there.
And we have one more, not actually a question, but I think this is a good way to sort of end the Q&A. Carolyn says, thank you so much for highlighting women's lives who would go unnoticed. What a wonderful commitment to bring them to life in your stories.
Oh, thank you very much. That's wonderful. I mean, that's half the fun. And I think that's what Marie Benedict does as well. It's just finding these hidden stories that people don't know about and bringing them to life, because so many of these women really deserve to have their moment in the sun.
Wow. Fiona, thank you so much for joining us tonight. I can tell from the comments in the audience, people have really, really, really enjoyed your being a part of the evening and for sharing those great pictures with us as well. They gave us a look and a feel inside, because we have things that play in our heads, but it's not quite always the same. And it's like, oh, to have some more direction about what happened. It was great. It was really terrific.
Oh, thank you. And thanks to everybody. It's so much fun watching the comments go up, and really, really appreciate it. And thank you for everybody who came back and stuck with us as we did it. I'm so proud of us.
We did it. We did it. We did it. Also, do you have time to talk to book clubs these days, or are you too busy with your writing to do individual book clubs?
You know, these days I'm not able to do that many, especially as we ramp up to June. But once things die down, I will be definitely able to zoom in, and I love doing it.
And then people can check in with you about that on your website. So you'll say not available these dates, check with me back for doing this. And I always say to people, if you're going to do this, you have to tell Fiona what book you want to talk about and what time zone you're in, so that you all can plan together. And we build websites for authors. And I'm always saying that is what goes on the form. Either that or you're 10 emails in trying to figure out what you're going to talk about. So
Yeah.
that was what you're supposed to do.
Exactly.
Thank you. I hope to see you soon. I hope to see
Yes, thank you. This was just wonderful. And thank you, Tom, for taking care of all the questions. And thank you, Carol. I just love what you do. And I'm just such an avid fan of the newsletter. And yes, I hope we meet at one of these book festivals. We'll have to.
Are you going to Tucson? Are you headed to Tucson? Or
I
not?
did it last year. So this year I'm not.
I don't have 5 days.
Are you going to go?
I don't know. I don't have enough time to be able to go someplace right now. We're super busy, but somewhere along the way, I'd like to do that again. It was a really fun festival to go to. And we'll have a couple of our readers are going this weekend, so I'm hoping to get somebody to write about it.
Great.
So I hope to see you soon. Thank you for joining us. And for those who are still here, we're going to talk about what's going to be next. So our next author is going to be Allison Pataki, and we're going to be discussing The Magnificent Lives of Marjorie Post, which was a book that came out last year. It is one of my bets on selections. It's now available in paperback, so you can get this. We're going to be meeting on Wednesday, March 29th at 8 o'clock. Sign-up's going to be available on Book Reporter, and we think we have every technical difficulty that we might have in the future figured out. We think we've got this. It still gives you 4 weeks to read the book. If you want to invite people from your book club, please do it. We love having people join us for these events. And Allison spoke with my book group one-on-one or one-on group, and she was fantastic. Marjorie Post has got this great life. I think it'd be a fun book for you to read. And also, if we want you to join us for our next Bookachino Live preview event, we're doing this on March 8th at 2 o'clock in the afternoon. If you're working, play a little bit of hooky, either that or sign up, because we send you a video of it later on. And I talk about books that are coming out March 7th through April 4th. And we're going to be doing a peek ahead at May. So just remember that this event will be available on our YouTube channel. I will be emailing the recording to everybody after the event is over, so that you'll be able to share it with others that may not have been able to watch. If you weren't able to catch the whole thing, you'll be able to watch as well. And it'll be also on our podcast, our Book Reporter Talks to podcast. A reminder, we have more than 150 author interviews available now on our YouTube channel and podcast wherever you listen to them. And stay on top of what we're doing at the Book Report Network with every event that we're doing by signing up for our weekly newsletter that goes out on Friday nights. Tom Donato, our editorial director, hits send really late in the evening, so you have something to read over breakfast in the East Coast, or end your night if you're on the West Coast, and it'll keep you up on top on everything else that we're doing. We so appreciate your joining us tonight. If you were trying to be here last week, we really appreciate your coming back. So look forward to seeing you next time. I'm going to stop share here real quick to say goodnight to everybody. So good night. Thanks for joining us. And we're looking forward to seeing you next time for our next Bookachino Live event. Thanks, everybody.